Okay, I will. Thanks for Dance for the opportunity. For Dance is supported by Jill and Rita Tanzpact Reconnect, which is funded by the Federal Government Commissioner for Culture and the Media as a part of the New Start Kulturinitiative, and of course by the Culture Department of the City of Leipzig. Dance dialogue events approach gaining an insight into the creative processes and working methods of dancers and choreographers. So here we are, and thank you all for sharing time together. As the audience is in a certain ways bridging, there is a chat possibility for questioning our two special guests. So welcome, Quim Bigas, dancer and choreographer. I think you are in Copenhagen now, who is working within the fields of choreography and documentation. Since 2018, Quim is Associate Professor on Choreography at the Danish National School of Performing Arts in Copenhagen. He is intrigued by the role of the body as a somatic entity that keeps upholding questions and concerns about the perspectives of the real. He is also questioning or doubting on the notion of the body as archive, which is also the point of a book project together with our second guest, André Lepecki, an expert on archives on dance and visual arts. So welcome, André Lepecki in New York. He's a professor and chair of the Department of Performance Studies at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. And as a writer and curator, he has published widely and edited several anthologies. He has also curated numerous festivals and exhibitions. The major topic today will be based on archive as absence regarding Quim's choreography, DV-Desplacament Variable, a documentary dance piece that takes as its starting point the audiovisual register of a dance house, in this case, Mercat de Flors, which is closed in 2012. But before going into details, we start with a welcoming practice by Quim, a guided structure on attention and seeing. So please, Quim.
Yeah, hello everyone. Martina, for this introduction. Yeah, just as a little warm-up, I want to suggest something which is very much related to some sort of like relaxing the gaze and relaxing the view, and it has to do a lot with the certain ideas of paying attention on how we pay attention, and it's a bit of a guided thing that I will ask you to close your eyes. Of course, everyone is and of course that's also okay. So just close your eyes, and also just to say, like, I will try to speak clearly, but sometimes some words kind of slip out from me, so hopefully we can follow each other on this. When I have my eyes closed, and when we have our eyes closed, at the beginning I sense this kind of shaking in my eyelashes, and I also see I also send like this kind of vibration that I need to send air to and to relax it. While I'm relaxing, I also sense that even with eyes closed, I can perceive. I can see different tones of darkness, and I can even perceive where the light is coming from. So I'm just going to give you some time to be with those shapes of darkness that I also personally find very pleasant. So in a way, you are seeing yourself with eyes closed. At some point, I would invite you to pay attention into your eyeballs. my sensation is that my eyeballs kind of lean forward. And I think sometimes they have to do with, that has to do with my tendency to wanting to see. But sometimes I like to try to kind of to kind of sense my eyeballs like leaning backwards, like leaning more towards the back. And while leaning more towards the back, I can sense more my neck. And I hope you can too. And I'm just going to invite you to spend some seconds kind of resting your eyeballs, like leaning backwards. At some point, you will open your eyes and you will just observe what is around you. You just very gently, just like open your eyes and just like browse around what is around you. And try to not stop on anything. Just try to keep browsing with your gaze, looking around. Different dimensions come into place, different senses of proximity, texture. You don't kind of attach to anything. You just keep like looking around, meeting what you find. And now that we know in a different way where we are, now we can start. Hello, everyone. I'm going to be talking about DV, Desplacament Variable. Desplaçament Variable is in Catalan, and it has to do with this idea of displacement and the variables of displacement. And it has a bit to do with that sense of multi-direction of a displacement within a movement that we do from one place to the other. There's like many directions to be taken. And with that premise and with that idea of the displacement, I go into an archive. I put my body in an archive. This comes a bit from my, let's say, obsession to the questions of what constitutes a place, and in a way with the question of how can I deal with what is already here. And the question of what is already here, at some point at the beginning, it became very much to be exactly as we just did, being with things that is around me and recognize that I'm at the place with things that resonates with me and that give me sensation, emotion that matters, that I find important. And at some point in that idea of place, then there is these different ideas of time and different layers of time that appear. And when I was thinking about what is already here, and when I ask about myself, what is already here in relation to dance, I need to look back also into what is already here, like in that question of like, what is there, what constitutes this dancing that I do now, not just from my own experience, but also from the sense of history or trajectory that different places have articulated. And in that case, I was invited to do a residency at the archive of Mercat de les Flors. Mercat de les Flors is a dance house in Barcelona. And it's a dance house that opened in 1981, 1983 approximately, as a theater and dance space mixing different things. And it was not until the 90s that they started to be more like of a dance house as we know it now. To look into that place, into that history, which is still very relevant now for the European scene, is also to look at certain ways of how politically dance has been structured and the way networks have been created, especially now when we talk about a lot of European projects that they are very much based on this kind of network idea. But I'm going to go to the archive now. And the archive started at the end of the 90s, beginning of 2000, and then it had its activity as a documentation center until 2012. In 2012, their activity stopped. The dance house didn't stop. What stopped was the archive. And the end of this archive took place because the archivist of the dance house was fired. Without archivist, in that case, the archive doesn't keep going on this ongoingness of presence taking place. It doesn't. Each movement kind of changes, and in a way, it opens a question if what is there is an archive still or not. I think also the notion of the archive is very broad. It deals with so many ideas, but if we think of an archive in the sense of entrance and exits that keeps reformulating what it is, its entity, and it keeps mutating what it is. That archive stopped in 2012, and it kind of like froze on time. And it's and the anecdote is also that when I enter into this archive, I acknowledge like a pile of posters with different post-its, and on the other side there was a desk, and then they told me that desk, it was supposed to put that posters that were on the other side still to be placed, because that desk in a way arrived after the archivist was fired. So it's a bit like this kind of like undone project, this kind of like unfinished project that is the archive also, that will always be undone in a way, in different ways, if it's for time or if it's for matters of inclusion or matters of diversity, it's always undone. And then there is this very strong idea of the absence, that what is not there also in that level, no, that by what is there, I can tell what is not there. If the structure is not there, sometimes we cannot point at absence. And there is this very beautiful relation to me, at least, with what I see in relation to the absence of what I don't see, and to relate to that on those terms also. So not to give to visibility its power, but to give to visibility its space to talk about what we don't see. And then when I enter into that archive, I look for solos, because I was very interested for the solo format. The solo format, from my point of view, I'm not like a scholar in the sense that I always have proofs of things. Some of the proofs that I found, they are given by the archive itself, by the way it's organized, by the way it's disposed, by the way, and then, or just by looking at simple facts as how many solos have been programmed in the history of certain spaces, and also like how the idea of the solo started to be much more frequent from 2007, 2005, how much it relates to the economic crisis, but also how much it relates to the entrance of new formats, new ways of creating dance through the form of solo work. So I was very interested in that solo idea, because it meets the precarity, but also the nuance and this kind of like always updating, looking for new forms that dance is still finding itself in, that I also find very interesting. So when I look for solos in that archive, I found 560 solos, and out of those I chose 38 for a work, I would say. And in order to choose these 38 works, I established what we would call criteria. I thought I also like to play a bit sometimes with certain notions of documentation, or how to play a bit around like with certain, let's say, objectivity that is not true, like fake objectivity. Like I like that kind of like, it's like I would try to put a frame, but that gives me flexibility enough in order to see how can I choose. And I'm just gonna tell you the criteria, which was, one is that that can hold like a broad spectrum of creations, that there is only one body on stage in the video, in the selected work, that there is a displacement, and by displacement I mean a body moving across space. I always find very interesting, especially on solos, how does a body moves from one place to the other. It's always it's kind of what I tend to go to. That the piece or the video doesn't have too many objects or a lot of set design. There is a peripheral figure of the dance field, and by peripheral figure, that's a difficult idea sometimes, because peripheral can be many things depending of the centrality we decide to put it on. Nevertheless, I also thought that it would be, for example, Susanne Link is one of the artists that I chose, but because on the times that she was working, she was not the central figure, because other people took, and Susanne took, like, well, I kind of like make my own because I actually love her work. So I was also like, I like her. So I also kind of took that space.
Okay, can we see some examples? I think we want to introduce it, and we want to see some of the solos which are original, and of course what you have done with your
Yes.
three dancers with it. So maybe we can
Yes.
start with the first three of it, and then you go
Perfect.
on with what you have to say. But I think
Yes,
the audience is curious now to see something.
Good.
Okay.
I'm glad you're curious then.
I am here, and there is nothing to say. If among you are those who wish to get somewhere, let them leave at any moment. What we require is silence. But what silence requires is that I go on talking. Give anyone thought a push, and it falls down easily. But the pusher and the pushed produce that entertainment called a discussion. Shall we have one later? Or we could simply decide not to have a discussion. Whatever you like. But now,
Say something, what we have seen already, to the audience.
I don't know, maybe Quim, do you want
Maybe,
to explain, because it's better? Yeah.
Yeah. André asked me also now while we were watching the video, watching the papers hanging on the stage. It's just like a graphic. We take a bit that idea of the line and the two dots, or the dot, the comma, or the little, and then we create a kind of a composition, like a graphic composition, that kind of brings back this idea of like the listing, no, like to enter into a list, to be listed. that it's very much part of an archive, especially when you are wanting to keep the register and when you want to find things again, let's say. It kind of builds up this kind of like, like accumulation, I would say. That it's very part, that it's a question mark that we always create with archives, no? Like they work a lot with this constant entry, that this constant entry is what reformulates what the archive is as well, at least from my point of view. So that's a bit the graphics that is there, because part of the stage that we created was very much a bit like how to bring the archive or certain ideas or certain thoughts of the archive into the stage, because a lot of the reenactments that I've seen are very focused on a specific work of an author, or like it's like I do a reenactment on an author, no? But what if the work kind of wants to bring a certain movement within the archive, let's say, or talk about the archive as archive. And I think part of the movement that we were engaged for this process was how to bring certain ideas of the archive into the stage. And then maybe what I can say that is also an important aspect for me, that is the next point of this conversation, is how the way we work with these materials. For me, it was also very important to not go on the level of looking for embodiment, like becoming Esther Salomon or becoming Shivalingappa or Germana Coni. Like not to play that ideas of becoming that, but more like by attending what we see, we can explain what we saw. And I like that idea of the storyteller. So in a way, what we were doing is, or the action or the poetic action that I wanted to suggest to the performers that were Aina Alegre, Silvia Sanfang, and Charlene Gugop, it was that to put the material there, to explain what you saw, to kind of place it instead of be it. In a way, I asked them to not be it. I asked them to keep explaining what they saw. And what they saw is those movements. And then there was a very conscious decision that there would be 3 performers on stage doing this, being aware that the sources are solos, because between these 3, there is the possibility that something of the solo comes up, but not by, in a way, I like the idea that none of them are doing it. It's just the 3 of them by being involved with the material, that something of the work might happen. So I like more to hold myself into the possibility that the work might happen instead of assuming that the work is happening. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of my romantic mind.
Okay, later on we will have the discussion about it with the audience, maybe. Why don't we see the other 3 of this to have a closer idea?
I ara el que veiem, que vosaltres veureu després, és un escenari ple de llums vermelles, tot vermell. Al mig de l'escenari hi ha una cadira, i en aquest escenari vermell, amb una cadira al mig, hi ha una música molt percussiva, molt plena, molt present. I ell el que fa és baixar una gran diagonal caminant molt lentament. Hi ha molt de pes, hi ha molta gravetat. Va baixant i quan arriba en aquesta zona el que fa és que tira les mans enrere, baixa el torse i aixeca la mirada cap al públic, cap a vosaltres. I el que fa a partir d'aquí és començar a girar sobre si mateix. Comença a girar a poc, amb els braços enrere, l'esquena baixada, comença a girar, va pujant cap a dalt de l'escenari la música cada cop és més forta, és més present, és més percussiva, ell continua girant, agafa l'accelera, accelera, fins que la música fa un canvi sec, pam, i ell es para.
We want André to react and reflect some of the aspects brought up, please. So take your turn.
Okay, thank you, Martina. And well, first of all, thank you, Quim, for inviting me and everybody at for Dance for the invitation. It's great to be in conversation with you, Quim, and with your work specifically. Okay, so I decided that for the conversation today, I would react. So it was really excellent to be part of the little experiment about closing the eyes, getting ready to be attentive, pay attention to pay attention. And so I opened myself to look at the videos anew, even though I had watched the videos in preparation for the talk. And also we talked, I don't know, a month ago also, and we had a conversation, not knowing that this was going to happen at the time, but we had a conversation about your work, and the conversation will continue. But there's something that you said, Quim, that makes me think a little bit further about even my own writing about dance and archive, which is something that I did around, I don't know, early 2010, responding to the wave of reenactments that happened around between 2007, 2010, 2011, especially here in New York around performance art, the infamous exhibitions of Marina Abramovic and several others, and also like this kind of gesture of choreographers to think through, how is it that the transmission of gesture allows for us to rethink dance history? And is it possible actually to present that history on stage, right? And I'm thinking here of some pieces by Tino Segal and Boris Charmat and other projects that, were being somehow invoking this notion of archive. But actually I wrote not about them, but I wrote also about other more, let's say marginal or peripheral, as you were saying. And of course, these terms are relative, peripheral artists. But there's something that you said that actually makes me want to think a little bit further about this question of archive and absence. And the story that you tell about the Mercat des Flors in Barcelona and the firing of the archivist. And I was thinking about the firing of the archivist. And then you ask the question, does the firing of this person, of this function, transform the space in which all this material is accumulated? Which prompts the question of what's the difference between a deposit and an archive. And in that sense, that makes me think of a really important formulation by Michel Foucault in The Archaeology of Knowledge, right? It has this incredible chapter on the archive, right? And he has a statement, which of course is a statement for philosophy and for a kind of epistemology of history, if you want, that is Foucauldian, it's a specific project. But I think it's a statement that Foucault makes that will allow us to think about this distinction between the deposit and the archive, right? And the distinction has to do precisely with the kind of labor. That's what I'm trying to get at. There's a kind of work that is involved in this. So Foucault says in that chapter, he says, an archive is not a deposit or a warehouse or a box where you put things in. An archive is a system of formation and transformation of statements. Now, knowing that for Foucault, the notion of statement is very specific, so there's only 15 minutes, it's not a lesson on philosophy, it's a lesson, it's a conversation about dance and archive, right? But let's keep for now like this sentence and see what is it that we can do with it, right? So an archive is a system of formation and transformation of statements. And we can start thinking about that system of formation and transformation as a kind of labor. So the archive, not being a deposit, not being a box, is a kind of machine or a system, right, that is already propelled by a kind of motion, right? And it's a motion of metabolism. It transforms, it produces and transforms at the same time, right? So in thinking about your role as a choreographer, and in between the videos, I asked you the question because I didn't know. I asked you, Quim, if you had ever danced that piece, and you said, no, I'm just like, I dance as we were rehearsing, but it was not, right? So it's interesting to think about your function as a kind of archivist as well, because you are the one that sets the system in motion, right? But then the question is like, are the dancers the deposit? Are the dancers the warehouse in which these systems of movement or these statements, these choreographic statements will, finally be deposited in? The answer is no. They're also not a deposit, right? Because each dancer is also laboring. So what I think becomes super, super interesting is that every time there is a kind of reenactment, and just use that expression for now, there's many others, revival, repetition, rehearsal, whatever, but let's use reenactment. Every time like you reactivate a dance in this kind of motion across time, in this kind of transmission of gesture, right? What you put in what you express is actually this machine of transformation, right? But once you do that, you realize that actually there's no original, because the original is also in a perpetual system of transforming itself, right? And it's this very interesting moment when, and I think this is important to emphasize because it could create some kind of misunderstanding, which is the moment in which Shiva Ganga is dancing a traditional, it comes from a different kind of repertoire. It's not an avant-garde experimental Esther Salomon performance, right? It's a different kind of body, it's a different kind of ancestrality, it's a different kind of regime of choreography, right? but it's there because, as far as I understand, it had also been shown in that stage, right? So it became part of that box called the theater, Mercat de las Flors, right? But even that traditional body, right, or that body dancing a traditional art form, is operating micro transformations, right? It's metabolizing tradition, is inventing futures as much as reformulating the past, right? So the question then for me of dance and archive becomes quite interesting, because it is the question that inhabits choreographic imagination at large, which is, given a certain space that we can call a space of life, given a certain mode of embodiment, given a certain period of time, what is it that I do as a dancer with these gestures that I receive, right? And then, like, and where do they come from? So it seems to me that dance, in that perspective, could be seen as a vast telepathic, telekinetic machine. It's always the transmission, it's always telekinesis, but it's a transtemporal telekinesis, right? And the mystery for the dancer is to negotiate how is it that one hosts by learning techniques, learning Graham, Cunningham, contact improv, like contact improv, you have like there's a bit of Nancy Stark-Smith and Lisa Nelson and Steve Paxson navigating, right? As much as in Shiva Ganga's dance, there is ancestrality of bodies navigating through 2,000 years, right? Right. So this kind of perpetual telekinesis actually, for me, makes me think that choreography and archive are one and the same thing. There's no other name. The question is, who's the archivist? That's the question, right? Right. And it's beautiful, that image, like, okay, this person is fired, and then the images that you give, like, okay, then the table arrives and it has no function, like objects like become inert all of a sudden, like everything becomes inert, right? So I find it super interesting, this notion of activation, this notion of mobilization, right? This notion of ancestrality and this notion of futurity, right? Because in a sense, like the 38 pieces that you chose, are already a kind of metabolism, right? It's not necessarily a historical operation, because, as you said, it's a, Suzanne Linke, well, I liked her, it's there, right? So you go like against, so it's a system of affect. There's an affectivity going on, and that's really, really, really important, right? So that's one thing I wanted to say. And the other thing I just wanted to say as well is, like, I keep thinking, like, so where is the impulse for archiving coming from? Where's the pulse? Where's the impulse? Like, what are the forces, like, forcing you to do something, right? And I was thinking, there's a I'm going to be very, very analogical and anti-digital, and I'm going to show a book on YouTube.
Yes.
Right. And there's a really interesting Singaporean artist. His name is Choi Ka-Fai, who in 2011 did a project called Prospectus for a Future Body. Maybe you know about this, Quim, and maybe Martina know about this.
Yes.
And it's a kind of mix between choreography and body art, in the kind of stellar kind of thing. And what he did, like, he created these electronic mechanisms. This is the artist, right? And you can see, I hope, like, this little machine, and you can see the electrodes, right, that he puts in his body. And he created like a mechanisms through which a very famous video from Hijikata is transduced. The video information is transduced into electric impulse that then goes into the muscle and then allows him to create this kind of buto, right? And then he puts them in this corps de ballet, right? and you see like the dancers also like, you know, being invaded by this impulse, like this impulse from, you know, from the past, right? These gestures. And I think like there's something really interesting between the affective and the technological that I'd like to ask you a little bit more about, Quim. If you're at all interested in other modalities of archiving other than the enfleshed one. So these are my first reflections with a little question to you.
Yeah.
And maybe it was less than 15 minutes, but I don't know, it felt organic.
That's good. Organic is good. Maybe, is it okay that, Martina, how are we?
Yes, I think it's because we are anyway closed for a conversation with everybody. So that's a good, linking.
Yes.
Thank you, André.
Well, thank you, André. Yeah, this is a gift for me, just to say and to hear you, and there is a lot of resonance to many things that I've heard. Maybe this question of the effective and the technological, maybe something that I also wanted to. Part of my interest is a lot on the materiality of the archive, like what kind of material is hosted in the archive. So most of these are DVDs, and I watch and we watch that as DVDs, meaning also that the failures of that object is very obvious at the moment, no? Like, but then it's true that part of my interest is very much about also like how certain materials transform through the archive. Materials meaning what contains the holder, let's say, but what also has the holder, no? Like it's a bit both. It's like they become one and only. They become the same. And to me, it was very important to say that we have not seen those works. And part of my insistence was very much like onto this two-dimensionality, and even like I really wanted to create like a feeling of blurriness at times. Because what is interesting is, to me, through videos, the access that you get to the body is very different. And even the quality of the movement or the way you can see it can be different. And it's very clear when you watch like a recording from the 80s and a recording from now. It's just very clear, even the speed of the image, and like it's just so. And that is something that I'm deeply interested. And I think the other thing that maybe the technological, I think I'm more into the subjective sense of experience. In a way, like also because, as I told when we were watching the video, is that I asked the dancers and also myself to look at the image from where they were seeing it also. So in a way, like there was no negotiation about like how the movement is, or there is no negotiation about this hand is here and this hand is there, which is something that sometimes dance does a lot. Like they want to create a consensus of form. And I did not want that, because in a way the form would come by the subjective experience of how we see it. And of course they might tune in and out of it, or they might see it in the same way or not. But in some levels, it was also the question, like, are we doing the movement? Are we reproducing the movement, or is it about the quality, or is it about like, and then some of them, they're like, I see a quality here, or like, or suddenly like with Redouane El Medeb, he turns a lot in the section I picked, and then like turns a lot, and then some of the dancers was like, I cannot turn that much, I don't want to do it. And then it was like, that's all right. Like we found, like also like this kind of when you do it, you are not out of yourself. Like you are just telling from what you saw. And again, going back to this idea of storytelling, which to me is important. Just like, I saw this and I saw that, you know, like, so it was not like very much about the body. I like to think of the body maybe in this telekinesis level, or its medium channeling role. So, and again, repeating myself, that the dancers is not the work. The dancer is just a filter to the work, or like is a channel to the work. And I think there's something about that.
Can I ask a question? Because it's super interesting, Quim, what you said to each other, which is great.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I can do that. So, but listen, it's super interesting what you're saying, because, okay, so I'm going to tell a story, okay? In 2003, maybe, I think it was around 2000, maybe a little bit later, 2005, Marina Abramovic came to this department. I'm here in the TIFF School of the Arts, and she gave a talk here to the department. And it was before she did the 7 easy pieces. And I'm telling this because she told this, and she may have told this in other events. This was a public event here. There's like 100 people or so. And she mentioned how she was once in Amsterdam, and she got invited to see a performance art piece. And she went to see this piece. It was by 3 young women, and she sat on this theater somewhere. And then the women start doing their piece, and she realized that they were doing "Art is beautiful, artist must be beautiful," which is this famous video by Marina that she's coming here and saying, because I wanted to stop the performance because they were doing this without permission. Okay. And then she said, and then I stopped myself because I thought, no, this is brilliant, but it needs to be properly done. Okay. And it may have been even like the beginning, the proto-beginning of her ideas for the exhibition of the Guggenheim, 7 easy pieces. And she said, it has to be properly done. How is it that a reenactment is properly done? First, ask permission. Second, have a historian. And third, permission, historian, pay fees, and then have a documentation of the reenactment for the future. Okay, so it's a regime, it's an economy regime that enters into that, right? And I'm wondering, like, you know, is it, once you make a distinction between the artist and the work, right? So there's something called the work, which is the choreography, the piece, blah, 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 the solo work, right? That is somewhat or perhaps totally autonomous in relationship to the intentionality of the artist, and the artist is the holder of the copyright, right? It's a thing that comes into the world and starts producing. So especially in solos, and especially in solos that are performed by the author, things get really confused. And I'm wondering, like, if this, I'm sorry to ask this question, it's a really boring question, but I'm wondering, like, if questions of economy and permission to dance, permission for you to dance, were somewhat of your concern.
We talk a lot about that because, of course, there is an ethical thing around it that was very difficult to relate to. First of all, like, the work is already in an archive, and my work is on the archive. It's not on the artist. Like, that's just like, that's kind of like my that I wanted to say about this is that some of the people that I show in the that are performed in this piece, first of all, the pieces are never longer than 2 minutes. The pieces that I take, and the way, and I take it a bit on the idea of reference or citation, and that is also something that the piece brings a bit, like that idea of reference, but also when the reference disappears.
Right.
Which is, to me, it's a question that was very present, and it's still very present in relation to when we talk about in academics, but also in art or like in performance. You know, like in which moment the references disappears and becomes some sort of commodity of work, and what is the limit of that. And in relation to economy, I did not ask these artists to use the materials, because to me they kept a bit on the level of citation. In a way, like I've never took more than 5 minutes of the works out of works that are very long. Anyway, and at the beginning of the show, people are given the hand program at the beginning of the show in order to read the hand program and read the pieces that are referred to in the show. So they are like properly referred, like properly mentioned, as the, like, it's this moment of like the light switch on, the light comes back, and we give the hand program. So people read all the 38 names of the choreographers that are mentioned in the work and that they're going to see. And then in a way, they're also going to disappear as the piece keeps going. So to me, there is also that seemed a good thing. At some point, I thought it would be a beautiful side project to do 38 emails asking for 10 seconds of a work to see what would happen. Also, now that I'm making the book, it's also interesting to be asking, no, for can I put this paragraph of your work? Am I allowed to do that? But the important thing is that, and maybe like going back to it, I did the piece on the archive, and these works were in the archive. And now, for example, I know, like, it was a big question mark also, it's like, do these artists know that they are in this archive?
Right.
Because that was a very important question for us. Now you can be many people are there without knowing it, and that's also very interesting for me. Also, like, and also like to write Esther Salomon to say that I'm going to use her work because it's in an archive. Her sense of authorship might be another one, that I write someone that never had an status as an artist, but is in the archive. So like, I'm going to use that work as well, because that's also what happened. I was not just choosing. There are figures there that I did not know about in any way, and I still don't know about. Just to say that it's not like some of the works that you've seen, maybe they are more like known, but some people, it's people that they make one work and it's in the archive and that's it. But yeah, there is something that, no, there was no economy established within the artist. They were already part of an economy system in the moment they enter into the archive, because what is interesting is that specifically this archive, it's a dance house. So you have to think that most of the works that are there, it's because they are part already of an economy of touring, an economy of many things. And also, like, it's very interesting to see that archive in relation of all these people might have wanted to be in this stage, might have wanted to be programmed. And I did not.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that they ever performed there. It just meant that they were that their videos arrived.
Yeah, their videos are there.
Can also, I ask? Oh,
yeah, sure.
Headline by Walter Benjamin. There's no place of documentation of civilization which is not at the same time a documentation about barbarism. And maybe you can explain a bit about the political dimension of the archive, or of the working process, or where do you find? I think I find something even in the three examples we have had. Like if I look at Radhum, I don't know whether I'm right, but I think I can see some pressure or whatsoever, or I can see the ethnia dancing, and I have some ideas about what's going on stage, but I might be mistaken. So please explain it a bit to me, and maybe to the others also.
I think that's a question for André.
Or for you both, yeah.
I can.
For André, perhaps he's the expert, but about the political dimension, you know, I'm interested in the work of archive and this special work. And when I saw like all the papers, Benjamin jumped into my eyes, you know, with this saying and the barbarism. And I was thinking, okay, of course, I wanted to find it, you know, in DV and in tiny sequences, but I might be mistaken. But I think you take the past into the present, and it's
well.
Maybe
I think yes. Go ahead if you. I mean, I can say a few things, but I was thinking very quickly. You know, because the sentence by Benjamin brings up the question of document, right? And I think it's interesting to think about the document also as a kind of system of captivity, right? The document, there's the world at large, and then there's the document, right, which captures aspects of that world. But I'm thinking like whether particularly the way in which Quim is bringing the conversation and what he called the subjective perspective. I think it's interesting when you say like there shouldn't be any consensus in relationship to what the gesture should be, you know, in this reenactment. I think there's a kind of desire to free up those documents, those objects, into another modality of existing. And in that sense, I think politically it's about these senses. And secondly, it's about a kind of system of fugitivity from notions of document in relationship to captivity, right? So that's one thing. Now, the other thing that I think about in relationship to Martina's emphasis on this sentence by Benjamin is to think about the ways in which these objects circulate in the world. The document circulates in the world as a kind of currency, particularly in dense economies. And how is it that then creates systems of belonging and systems of exclusion? And that's what I find interesting in your I would say like long in duration performance, Quim, of looking at this is a question. Are you looking at 560 documents? Did you look at all of them and then you pick 38? Did you actually look at 560? Okay, so you look at 560. That's like a lot. That's a super interesting project in itself, right? I would make an art piece out of it. I would just be sitting somewhere and looking at these things for hours and hours, for days, actually. And that's a kind of liberation because, you know, if I can be a little bit performative, I can walk in my office right now and show like that behind my couch, there are, you know, these VHS documents of dance from the European dance from the 90s, you know, that, and also not only European, but like they're all here and they've been here for 20 years and they haven't been activated. And they're just dormant there, and it's a pity, right? So it's, and I don't know if there's some kind of barbarism in the fact that these tapes are here. You know, I see Laribot, I see Vera Montero, I see Cloud Gate Theater, I see Jean Fiadet, I see like Meg. They're all here, completely inert, right?
But I go back to something that on the exercise of looking around before. One of the premises to me sometimes is one of the premises of this project with the gaze that I start doing, which has nothing to do with the archive, but it does because it constitutes the way I look at it, has a lot to do with the question of like, this kind of like that I feel that everything around here, in a way, wants to be acknowledged. And I don't mean seen. I mean, I can also sense it with my back or something, but that there is all these entities that we have created for different reasons that wants to be looked at. And also to question the way we attend to things and the way we put attention to things is super relevant. Like, especially in these times in which recognition plays a big role in the way we're looking at things. And sometimes it would be great to not play recognition and to go for a more perceptive, speculative way of looking at things, without having a hold on them, without appropriating them. It's just like just holding them in a way, just being with them. And it's great that you, Martina, bring this quote, because it was mentioned. It was also public. It was part of my hand program. Because I really like that sentence. Of course, it's very misplaced, but I really like to bring that idea of ruin or catastrophe into the event of the archive. Things are disposed for me to acknowledge that, and how that disposition is just a system for me also to point at what is not there. And to talk about the visible is also, for me, a very direct way to talk about absence. And that's also my way of relating to the archive. I have not been in the archive thinking like, oh, this is dense history. No, that's not. It's like, oh, this is here. Like that's kind of like also like to relativize all these ideas. And I think there is a lot of in this disposition of the archive. Of course, there is a social and political environment unfolding out of it in different ways. It's also because in relation to the economy crisis that we talked about before, the fact that it stopped in 2012, and that is like economically, like that's an economical crisis that we had that is clearly political as well. It's clear affecting our modes of living. And also like dance archive that also closed in 2011 for financial cuts. But
it's almost the same.
Exactly.
A very big one, a very good one. And now, you can go, but it's no more the same, like being there, living there, and, researching and stuff like this.
Yeah. I think there has been there also, like, I work in another archive that has been abandoned for 6 years. And then like the question very much is always this thing that all these projects started around the beginning of the 2010, because the financial cuts also decided to create a move on these kind of resources and where they were going. To me, that's political, like with no doubt. And then, of course, this whole merchandise involved within the performance and the dance scene. It's a political question as well. Like, to me, it's a very relevant political question to ask ourselves, especially before you had to send the DVD, or like, it's very clear in the archive of Mercat de Flors, you can see like suddenly, like in a row, like a lot of DVDs from Japan, for example. And that just proved that Mercat de Flors went to Japan, or that Japan went to Mercat de Flors, and they gave like 20 DVDs to consider the possibility of programming a Japanese artist. And then it's not anymore about the artist, it's about the origin of the artist. And then that's also political for me. And there is a lot of, like, I think I really like to look into the archives or to documentation resources in order to look at the implications they carry with them. Because it's not just a memory, it's a system of political, social, cultural, artistic. And then the other thing also that I also got very with this barbarism and lost and absence is like, we don't realize that, or like I don't become aware of the way dance has been constructed through many years, and what's that image of dance that we have been constructing, and how do I want to also do something about it? No, like it's also like go back to representation to change each representation, and not just avoid representation in order to do something else, which it just like creates like, no, I want to go back to that thing that represents dance as well, in order to see how can I move from it, in order to see what's my space on it. And I think the absence for me is also in that. It's also like, I am not that work. I will never be that work. But there is something on that work that I can carry, that I can recognize, that I can attend to. And also to put attention into that, to me, there is a political aspect into it, because it creates with this kind of big peripheral view of things that to me is relevant, if I have to say.
Practice, with a cam off, using the audio description of some movements that the performers do on DV. So like the invisible and visible is going hand in hand, and we have to learn how we are going to see or whatever, or creating something different. So should we do this? Now this is Cindy van Acker.
Sure.
Audio.
Yeah, just to say to our we're gonna listen to an extract from Sean Lindig Oerop, which is one of the performers of DB, explaining one of the movements they've done. And the invitation is that while listening to this audio, you can either like close your eyes and try to imagine that movement, or even like if you have space in your living room, try to do it. And then afterwards, if you want, just like share some stuff on the chat, just to hear how it went, and then we're back to do a little continuation of this. Thank you.
We start in the front, like really in the front. It's curious because we have this habit of always putting it on, I guess that's stage left, to the front line of the linoleum, because somehow in one of the first rehearsals we had with this material, there was a light that we were aiming to be in. But that light doesn't exist anymore, and it didn't exist in the original performance on the video. She's just somewhere in the center of a space, very much to the front. So, but anyway, we place ourselves on the stage left, crouching down with the right foot on the floor, and the left foot on the floor, and the right leg folded under us. And then we place our right hand on the floor. And slowly we send our left hand to the ceiling, the palm of the hand facing the audience, I think. And in this moment, very slowly, I start to send my left foot forward. So somehow, I think this material is a lot about triangles, or at least it also looks like it looks a lot like yoga, which I'm not good at, but sending foot forward, doing something with a triangle. And now is a hard moment, because then I need to send somehow the back of my right knee towards the wall behind me, so somehow creating a triangle with my 2 feet. But it's a very hard moment because I have my weight out in my right hand, but my right hand needs to be placed quite precisely on my side, so I can straighten and lengthen both legs. But anyway, when that happens, I bend my left knee and I send my weight forwards. That means to the stage right. And at that time, my left hand is also searching stage right, and my right hand off the floor now is searching behind me. So I'm creating direction on the 2 sides. And while that is happening, I'm lifting my right leg, which is behind me now. My body is somehow pointing towards stage right. And then by transferring weight further to my front, I can lift my right leg and I start to circle it around. It's a bit above ground, but not so much. I'm still quite low. I have my left leg very bent, and then I'm trying to circle smoothly and evenly. My left leg bent smoothly and evenly. I'm circling my left leg around to the front, and my foot is flexed. And when I come into this kind of like hurdle, it's like I'm jumping a hurdle position. I place my right heel on the floor and I transfer weight onto it while I'm twisting my body, turning my body to face the audience. Still very, very low, and I'm shaking a lot at this point because I don't really know how to do this smoothly and evenly. And then my arms are to the side, and it's a bit like I'm doing an aeroplane, but in a very low position, and I'm looking down to the floor. And this material takes much less time than it took me to explain it, that's for sure.
Finish talking.
Yeah, okay.
So we are back, and I just would like to see if some people feels like writing something on the chat about how it went, and then afterwards we're gonna see this extract from the piece.
Okay, there was an answer, but it's already answered by you, so I'm sorry. Okay. So, nothing else. But maybe we can see the original, you know, of this practice.
Sorry, Martina. I would like to wait for a second if the people wants to say something in the chat, just for a second, and
Okay.
then we go for the original video. It's video. It's never an original.
Yeah, the
but we know
video.
what we mean.
Two-dimensional. Yeah, right.
Quim, you are mute. I can hear you.
Am I?
You were. I mean, I could see your mouth moving, but nothing. Now you're okay.
Now I'm okay. Yeah. I know, because when I leave, it mutes.
Ich kann das nicht lesen.
Christopher is saying that after Sun said it, he could not stop thinking of yoga, and I also really like that. I also really like that idea of the yoga, because it puts me back on the questions of, originality, or like when yoga, for example, had become such a thing. It's also interesting to think of yoga suddenly within this conversation. I find it. Yeah, there is a lot of yoga involved. Yeah, and maybe
Warrior
now that
pose.
thank you. And then Alma is also saying that she was arranged. She realized that she was doing the wrong front,
Right.
and then she had to change.
Yeah.
I also really like that idea of like audience in a room. Where is it? I also really like that. Maybe we can now, Charlie, if that's okay, watch the extract from the piece.
Yes.
This is super interesting. It's super interesting because, for me, like in the beginning, I was just like getting busy. Oh, center stage. Oh no, it was the stage left. Oh, so I kept like running back and forth, and there's light. Oh no, but the light is here. Oh, actually, there's no light. So it's just like, and then it was less about yoga and more about triangles, and then I just got lost. But what's really interesting is like this notion of capture, right? Like this fantasy that through description we can actually capture something, and then the further fantasy that through image we can capture something, and then through further fantasy that, so like this perpetual fugitivity of movement. It's really interesting, right? In relationship to these, to documents, to language, to discourse, to, choreography as a kind of modality. It's very interesting. But it's very nice to have this choreography in the head somehow, also to be invaded by this voice and just to turn the cranium into a stage. It's nice.
Yeah, I think a lot of the audience, they were describing what happened to them and when they were lost and when they found themselves back. So they didn't question something, but they were, like you saying, like their own choreography was mixing up with what they heard, and what they were trying to follow. And that's very interesting.
I also find beautiful, as also André, is also like this perpetual futurability. The fact that when doing it, I also went here to my to the living room, and then I was like changing left and right all the time, as I said in the video. And because I also have a kind of a vague memory of that abstract, because I know it, the image of it was trying to visit me in order to sense myself right on connection. There was like there's this whole alignment happening between the instruction, the image of the instruction, and what I'm doing, kind of. That becomes very interesting. And I also think, like, in a way, it's also like to keep trying it means it's happening in a way. And I also like that gap also. Like I think, for example, it's beautiful that everyone like was holding something to do on different ways, like by location, by space, by levels, by sites, like. And I think it's also that's also the part that I find more exciting, if I can say.
Yeah.
Much time anymore, but we have something else to show, because in the second half of the DV there is, like, I call it like a mix of archives, so it's expanding, it's improvement, and maybe we show this for minutes and then we talk about it, what we see and hear, and you of course tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Martina.
then once we reach the back, it's like we're hiding behind a curtain. There's no curtain, but I'm at least imagining I'm hiding behind a curtain, and we count to, I think, 11 or 13. And then we come out from behind that curtain and we walk back diagonally across stage, again with this kind of like energy. I don't know what to call that guy, but he's a guy. So he's walking with his chest first, and he's kind of like determined but happy and energetic.
Un momento de pausa aquí, y el inicio del movimiento viene por las piernas que se cruzan sin levantarse del suelo, primero una y después la otra. Después hacia atrás.
Como una gallina. Té un punt off balance i sempre s'aixeca les cames des del genoll.
On pense beaucoup aux positions du yoga. On prend la jambe droite, on la croise au genou gauche, on bascule tout le corps jusqu'à mettre les mains par terre et on commence à se déplacer vers notre gauche tout en faisant un bruit très grave de la gorge.
So Quim,
Okay, who wants to say something? André, please.
I think I'll pick up the question that you had while we were talking when the video was playing, Martina, which had to do with scenography and scenographic decisions in relationship to displaying this archive, right, Quim? So we talked so far about like the process of being in the archive, what's behind it, dramaturgically, politically, ethically. But then like there's I loved the amount of paper that is there. I think the relationship between dance and paper is also something essential to discuss. Even the fact that the first book that has choreography printed is by someone named Feuillet, which is little piece of paper in French. So Feuillet is already like writing dance on itself, on its own name. So that's beautiful. But I'm just thinking, Martina has this question about like the mise en scène and, like, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can try.
Is the stage an archive?
Well, first, yes. Well, first of all, like I think I had a flashback because in one of the workshops that I did with you, André, many years ago, you gave us this text of paper or me,
the Derrida,
by Derrida.
Yes.
And already, like I'm someone that I always place paper on my work, always in one way or the other, and that text really also lighted something that for me is very relevant, like that idea of visibility in paper, and how the paper becomes that like it's the one that gives visibility to the documented or the undocumented, or like like the paperless and all this whole idea that to me is something that it creates a lens for my way of reading things and looking at things that becomes very relevant and useful. And so paper had to be there for me, and it was very clear that I wanted the paper to be one of the elements that kind of like accumulate, that brings that sense of accumulation of the archive. And in a way, I had this metaphor. The piece starts with everything like kind of like empty, and this first column of paper kind of goes up as the piece goes on, and then the second piece of paper also goes up as the piece goes on, and that paper and that column going up also changes the perspective of the bodies and changes also our relation to the bodies with the sizes that are around. And I like that metaphor also sometimes, that this idea of legitimacy or this idea of archive create this kind of like dimension that I was also very interested in. How can I bring that idea of dimension, no? And how idea of dimension at some point also needs to collapse. And I also, and there is also like a moment in which one of the columns kind of collapse, and then the paper kind of like, and makes its own form without being anymore that list of the archive, no? And then one of the process of the archive is also to, in Mercat they didn't do it a lot, but normally you need to throw out certain things in order to keep the archive alive. That's kind of part of the philosophy of archive as well. You don't keep everything. You need to throw things as well. And I really like that idea of the big ball of paper, for example, kind of bringing into place a bit that leftover, that idea, that kind of like that idea. And then on the stage, there's also these little boxes where DVD are placed, because in that little boxes is where the archive relies on. So in a way, part of the different elements of the scenography, in one sense, is very much things that are part of the archive realm, or the idea, or certain ideas of the archive. But on the other side, the light and the sound played like a very important role, because the light, in a way, I asked them to reproduce the light that each piece has at the beginning, and then later they kind of like play with everything they had. But at the beginning, every little abstract that we've done is trying to bring back certain light that was there. And then we took the recordings from the piece as well, like literally. And then out of that, we created also different orders, because the light, the sound, and the dancers, they kind of more or less have the same structure. The structure is that the first part you reproduce by entrance on the archive. The second part is that you create links by relations on space. And the third part is like you create links by anatomy, which is more like it's a fast link, let's say. And with the sound, we created that until at the end he created one song, like what we call it a song, kind of forgetting the thing and creating its own entity. And the light, what I found interesting is that the place of the shadows and the visibility and the movement of the darkness, for me was very important in this work. And then we kind of fall in love with that idea that there is a certain sense of time that keeps passing. There is this circularity of like time just passing, and while passing, these things still develop the relations in a way, because nothing else will come in a way. And that's kind of like a bit the logics of how we work with it. And then there is a secret performer that appears once in a while, that is the stage designer, that at times arranges the space a little bit. It's kind of like a very subtle,
nice
person that appears with a big bag, with a big ball of paper, leaves it, and then goes. And then maybe after 10 minutes comes and places a sticker somewhere and leaves. Like someone that kind of reformulates the space and brings like a certain quotidianity or a certain passing by to it. Those are the elements that are like in the stage, on the way we thought of the stage.
Nice.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah.
Okay, we are, time is running, so maybe I make a short close-up and then we are done, so to say. Okay, I think we were able to show that dance is more than just a static movement. And so it's a possibility, or it's possible to understanding the archive as well as its memories it contains as a movement that evolves within place, and a feeling of what has happened and what would continue to move itself between layers of impression and resonance, opening a frame for multi-directional movement that puts us in a relation to absence, to our own sensation of time and sense of place. So I have to thank you, Quim and André, and for dance and the audience for this great inspiring experience. And I would like to thank also Charlie Fauché for his wonderful technical support, and Hendrik Rode, who was giving the job to me, so to say. And I would like to say goodbye to everybody and hope to see you in three-dimensional modes the next time, and stay healthy. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Quim and Martina.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being there. And ask questions and knock the door or whatever you want to do.
It's good to meet you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That was a good pleasure.